Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to Critical Thinking through English Composition. This is the makeup lecture for Tuesday, September the 23rd, 2025. Very sorry that I couldn't join you on campus this afternoon. This makeup lecture will have to do. Today, I'd like to give you some feedback on your first writing assignment, and I'd also like to talk a little bit about Unit 3 in the textbook, which covers analogies. So let's get started. I've prepared a PowerPoint here. Let's bring it up and get started. Oh, bring it up here. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to say about your homework assignments, this was constructing an argument, was overall, they were pretty well done. Generally speaking, people understood what I asked them to do, but I do have a few qualifications that I would like to make. Excuse me. First of all, I would like to say, please do not upload a separate Word file unless I ask for one. I told people to just copy and paste their argument and the link, the bullet point list of the premises and conclusion. Just copy and paste it into the text box on Cyber Campus assignments. Most people did that. Thank you very much. But there were a few people who attached a file instead. And this term, I'm trying to reduce the amount of time that I spend on this sort of thing. And it takes a little bit more time if I have to constantly download and then unzip files and stuff and folders. So in the future, please don't upload a Word file unless I ask. Although some students did a very good job with the format, like they had their three separate premises and they had a conclusion, quite often the conclusion itself was a little bit lackluster, meaning the conclusion didn't really state anything definite. There is a problem, therefore something must be done. That's not a very interesting conclusion. Or there needs to be a law was another one. But the problem is, well, what needs to be done? What specific law should be implemented? If you want to have a strong conclusion, there has to be something definite. Don't be afraid to take a stand. Don't be afraid that I will disagree with your conclusion. I hope that I disagree with some of your conclusions, but you will not lose any points for them. A well-argued conclusion that is, takes a stand on something and has a firm opinion is much more preferable than a wishy-washy conclusion that doesn't actually say anything. It's one thing to identify three separate parts to a problem which require a solution, and it's another thing to actually try and give a concrete solution. Simply stating that this is a problem which requires a solution is not really that strong a conclusion at all. Also, when you list your conclusions, so when you list your premises, it's a good idea to see whether there are some premises that could be combined. If the premises are very, very similar, you might actually find it better if you can just put them together in one combined premise and then think of something completely different, which you can have for the next one. If you have premises that can easily be combined without losing any of the strength of your argument, then it's probably best to do so. Sometimes premises are quite independent of each other. They're three separate but equally relevant premises. Other times, they are causally related, which means we have A, and because of A, B, and because of B, C, therefore the conclusion. There are different ways of using premises to reach a conclusion. You should decide which would be better for your particular argument. Do you want to have an argument where you've got three separate but distinct three separate and distinct premises that will support your conclusion? Or do you want to have them causally related? We've got A therefore B, B therefore C, therefore all of these together, we must do insert conclusion here. Decide which is best for you. Now, what actually is a good premise? A couple of students wrote premises that were not actually full sentences. Remember, a premise is a reason that leads toward your conclusion. So what makes a good conclusion? Well, it might be a fact, like whether it's a historical fact or a scientific fact, or looking at the situation and saying, listen, this is the state of the world, or this is a reality which has to be dealt with. Some kind of fact, or maybe it's an ethical statement. Maybe you want to say that something is happening and it is wrong. Something is happening that is cruel or unjust. That could be an ethical statement that could be used to support a conclusion. Sometimes people will have predictions, something is likely to happen in the future. And then that will lead to their conclusion. Therefore, we have to do something to prepare for that eventuality or to try and prevent that from happening. Or sometimes we will just have an evaluation of some kind. Something is better than something else. Therefore, we should invest more money in A rather than B. All of these are quite good as bases for a good premise. So when you decide what your premises are going to be, think to yourself, is this a fact that will lead to my conclusion? Is it an ethical statement that will persuade someone on the basis of a moral argument? Is it a prediction that will help us decide what we should or shouldn't do? Is it an evaluation of some kind or something else? Whatever it is, it should be clear, it should be concrete, and it should be concise, and it should lead clearly to your conclusion. I should not read your premises and think, how do they go from the premise to the conclusion? There should be a clear connection. Yeah. Also, when people did their paragraphs, if you are going to write an online comment, it's quite common for people to include a self-reference, like I think, or they might try to summarize an issue by saying it all boils down to this, or let's get this straight. This type of language is very, very common in an online comment. And this is exactly what I was looking for when students did their homework. What I really didn't want was students to simply summarize the argument that was in the article. Remember, I'm not interested in what the article was about per se. I'm not interested necessarily in the argument that the article is discussing. I'm interested in your opinion and how you create an argument out of this. This assignment was all about how you can practice expressing your opinion with 3 clear reasons that lead to your conclusion. All right, here are a couple of specific examples I noticed. Sometimes students don't necessarily know the correct word. There was one person that wrote about the death penalty, and they said the death penalty should be ended. But the death penalty should not be ended. If there is a law that you think should be removed from the legal system, then you would use the term abolished. The death penalty should be abolished. This law should be abolished. Another person was writing about the right-wing party. I think this was in England, and they said it was, I think it was inevitable that the right-wing party was going to lose. We don't say the right side party or the left side party. We talk about wings, kind of like wings of a bird. So it was inevitable that the right wing party, or we talk about the right wing of the political spectrum, the left wing. Some people will use the term leftist or rightist, but I think those tend to be quite emotionally charged terms. So I would rather use just left wing, right wing, or center if you're discussing the political allegiance of a party. The third example I have here, schools should promote digital well-being and encourage healthy online habits. This is an example of a conclusion where I think it would benefit from being more specific. Yes, I think most people would agree that schools should promote healthy online habits for their students. And students should learn how to control and manage their online lives. But how exactly? And this is where the more specific you get, the more you open yourself up to criticism because your conclusion is more specific. But this is exactly what I'm looking for. I want you to tell me exactly what you think should be done. Don't just tell me that the school should promote digital well-being and encourage healthy online habits. How should they do that? What specific recommendations do you support? Okay. All right. So I want to give another couple of examples that I think really highlight the importance of the first two rules that we looked at in this course. Number one, resolve premise and conclusion. Be able to distinguish between the reasons and the point that you're trying to make, and also unfolding your ideas in a natural order so that the reader can easily resolve premise and conclusion. I want to give you two examples which I think need a little bit of work in order for the reader to resolve the premises and conclusion. Here we go. First, in our digital world, internet and social media became an integral part of our daily life. Children are also consuming content for entertainment or using it for educational purposes. However, there are many discussions among parents questioning children's safety on the internet. Since children's mind is full of curiosity and naivete, they are becoming vulnerable to inappropriate behavior or content in the online space. To prevent that, parents should explain that other people's behavior on the internet could be unpleasant sometimes and limit access to internet for children at a young age. Overall, the internet is not a bad thing in general. It provides us a lot of useful information, etc., even though it could be a dangerous place for children's mental state. Now, there's a lot of information here, and I think most people would agree with each of the sentences, but they might have some difficulty picking out what the ultimate point is. If you want to think of an argument as kind of being like the solar system, the sun is your conclusion, right? The strongest, brightest thing in the whole solar system. And then all of your premises sort of go around that, right? They're subordinate to your conclusion. When I look through here, it's not immediately apparent what the conclusion is. Is it the first sentence? No. Is it the last sentence? No. I think the conclusion here is that to prevent children from being taken advantage of on the internet, parents should explain that other people's behavior on the internet could be unpleasant sometimes and limit access to internet for children at a young age. I'm just taking the words there from the paragraph. I think this paragraph would definitely benefit from a single, clear, concrete, and concise sentence that tells me what the main point is. There are a lot of great premises here, but they need to be brought together in a very clear way. And I would probably suggest putting the conclusion at the beginning or the end and having some kind of indicator word. Remember, we talked about indicator words in, I think it was the second or third class, therefore, consequently, since, that would be for premise. But yeah, having a really good indicator word so that we can see clearly what the conclusion is. Here, I see a lot of great ideas, but I don't see a clear conclusion, just a lot of pretty decent premises. Second example, we are living in times where simply having different ideas, thoughts, or even beliefs from others could put our safety or our loved ones at risk. And even more if you are a public figure like Charlie Kirk, who died in front of his family and the 3,000 admirers present that day. And of course, the people who didn't like him and commit the felony against him. Charlie Kirk's voice power of speech was that strong and big that the only way haters find to stop him was by killing him. As a result of this tragedy, security must be improved in stage debates where there can be a lot of people preventing to do something like this happen. I didn't change any of the small grammatical or syntactical errors here because I can understand clearly what the student is trying to say to a point. A couple of quick notes. I was wondering whether anyone was going to write about the Charlie Kirk assassination, and there were a few students that chose to write about this, not only in our class, in all three of my classes. And I have absolutely no problem with students writing about this. I think there are a lot of great arguments that could be made related to this assassination. Whenever there is an act of political violence, it raises a lot of very significant issues in society, whether it's related to gun control or political polarization or the role in the internet in spreading hate, which can result in political violence, as well as a plethora of other issues. Now, what I would first say is, if you're going to have an argument that is referring to a very specific historical event, in this case, an assassination, I would recommend putting the actual date in there. Rather than saying that day, I would recommend putting in the specific date. Day, month, and year. Now, at the very end, it says this tragedy must be improved in stage debates where there can be a lot of people preventing something like this happen. The student is trying to say that we need stronger security. Now, if that is what the student wants to argue, we cannot prevent violence. Although we may disagree with political violence, there is always going to be the lone nut or the single shooter, somebody who will resort to lethal violence as a way of expressing political disagreement. In that case, if your conclusion is we need stronger security, then you need three premises that would talk about the fact that the political environment is very violent, potential weaknesses in the security that we currently have, like how could this event happen, what was wrong with the security, how potential improvements in security could reduce the risk of this, and then maybe your conclusion could be a very specific recommendation. In this dangerous world where we have these weaknesses in security and these other issues, what could be done specifically in order, from a security point of view, in order to prevent the reoccurrence of this kind of tragedy? And I think that would be a very strong argument. Okay, so I would like to give a little bit more information about premises now. When we talk about premises, up until now, it's been very simple. Simple sentence for each premise, and then your conclusion. However, as we get into longer arguments, you'll find that you need to support those premises. You can't just tell me something. You have to give me examples, details, specifics. Use a generalization plus a couple of cases. Use an analogy, and we'll be looking at analogies in just a moment too. By doing these things, like giving me a statistic that shows your premise is reliable, giving us a fact or a detail that deepens our understanding, or a comparison with something relevantly similar, That's what an analogy is. You can make your premise much stronger and therefore much more convincing to the listener or to the reader. And I'd like to give you an example from an argument that I've had with friends in the past. And this is that South Korea should introduce a new tax to help pay for eventual unification with North Korea. All right, so very quickly, I studied Asian studies as my undergraduate major. I did a year's study as an exchange student at Yonsei University. And one of the topics which I found incredibly fascinating, still do to this day, is the possibility of unification with North Korea and how South Korea could potentially prepare for that. Now, although I was not a big supporter of President Lee Myung-pak in years past, one policy suggestion that he had introduced, I don't believe this was carried through, was that South Korea should introduce a new tax to help pay for eventual unification. And his argument was very simple. And I've changed it a little bit, and I've put in a couple of my own ideas here. This is what I think. Number one, unification with North Korea will likely occur suddenly. Number two, unification with North Korea will be very expensive. And number three, South Korea has not set aside any money to pay for, oh, hold on. Just a moment here. I'm going to have to go back. I've got just a moment here. Let me just quickly fix that mistake on the PPT. Okay, there we go. All right, so let's go back to the first premise. Unification with North Korea will likely occur suddenly. If I wanted to give an example here, I might do a quick comparison with Germany, for example. In the months leading up to unification of West and East Germany, there were discussions amongst academics at the very highest levels who argued that there would never be unification of the two Germanys. However, when it happened, it occurred with great suddenness, and this is something that we should expect. When North Korea ceases to exist, and I will take this as one of my premises that when unification happens, it will be under circumstances favorable to the South, meaning it will be South Korea absorbing North Korea. I believe that it will likely occur suddenly. Kim Jong-un will not call up South Korea and say, listen, we are planning to collapse in 5 years, so please be ready for unification by early autumn 2030. That is not how things work in the real world. So since unification with North Korea will occur suddenly, South Korea needs to be prepared for this. And I think you could use the case of Germany as a very good example of that. Next, unification with North Korea will be very expensive. And here you could actually give some very specific numbers because the estimated cost of unification of North Korea and South Korea is one that has been studied for many years. And there are a number of estimates that you can give, from very conservative estimates to numbers that are really quite mind-boggling. And you could even give a couple of numbers to show that you have seen both the low end and also the high end of estimates for the cost of unification with North Korea. It's going to be very, very expensive. And you can give numbers in order to support your premise. Number three, South Korea has not set aside any money to pay for eventual unification. This is something you would need to check up on. Has South Korea in the last few years started setting aside money to pay for eventual unification? Remember that third rule, always start from reliable premises. And I believe, to the best of my knowledge, this is a reliable premise, that South Korea has not set aside any significant amount of money to pay for eventual unification. They're not setting aside a certain part of the budget each year in order to build up an account that will be able to pay for those immediate costs that will come with unification with North Korea. So each of these possible premises could be supported with numbers, examples, comparisons with similar cases, etc. And they would all lead to that conclusion, which is that South Korea needs to introduce a tax in order to get the money ready for a potential unification with North Korea. I think, given these three possible premises, the conclusion is one that follows quite naturally from that. Okay, and I'd like to give one more example here, and this is the cost of unreliable premises from a real-life example in history. I have here a quote, when the enemy attacks our garrison in the valley, we will win a great victory. Now, this is a predictive argument. I'll show you what the valley looked like here. Now, I'm not sure whether anyone is familiar with this area or this particular battle, but let me just give you a brief historical overview. In the late 19th century, France was expanding its imperial empire and dominated Southeast Asia by this part of Southeast Asia by the early 20th century. It was called Indochina, and it was comprised of the three modern-day nation states of Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. In World War II, Japan wound up occupying Indochina, or Indochine, as it was called by the French. And let's just say the Vietnamese were not very anxious to have the French resume colonial control after World War II ended. And this led to the First Indochina War between 1946 and 1954. Now, I'm not going to give you a long lecture on the history of the First Indochina War, but let me just say this. By 1954, the war had been dragging on for 9 years, and the Viet Minh, who were the communist Vietnamese that had been one of the more dominant nationalist groups towards the end of World War II, they had transformed their small guerrilla army into a modern military fighting force that was ready to take on the French army in a set-piece battle. And this battle occurred in the northwest corner of the country in an area that would become known to the world as Dien Bien Phu. You might remember from our second class where I played the song We Didn't Start the Fire by Billy Joel. Dien Bien Phu Falls was one of the lines from that song. And that's because at the end of this siege battle, the French surrendered. The Viet Minh raised the flag with the red background and the gold star. And that ended France's colonial domination of Vietnam. And then history continued and went into another chapter. Now, leading up to this battle, the French had a very particular premise and conclusion argument for why this fight was going to end in their favor. The French actually sought out this battle, and they chose it in the place of their choosing. And this was what they said. All right, look, we're going to have a big fight with the Viet Minh, and we want to have it here, and I'll tell you why. The enemy cannot transport heavy artillery into this valley because it's very, very far from their logistical centers. They won't be able to get like big artillery cannons. They won't be able to shoot shells at us. So they're going to have relatively small weapons probably, and then we'll be able to beat them. Number two, even if they can transport this heavy artillery somehow, you know what? Those artillery guns aren't any good if you can't keep supplying them with shells. And once again, these shells are going to have to be coming along like the same few routes where we can bomb the roads, and they won't be able to keep them supplied. So even if they are able to transport heavy artillery into the valley, they won't be able to keep these heavy weapons supplied. And even if they are able to transport the artillery into the valley, and even if they are able to somehow keep them, oh, here we go, what happened there? Even if they are, hold on. Something has just happened here. Oh, mute all. Hmm, hold on just a minute. Hold on just a moment. Technical difficulty. Okay, sorry about that. I just had a bit of technical problems with my computer. I'll continue. So just to go back to the original argument there, here we go. Number one, the enemy can't transport heavy artillery into the valley. Number two, even if they can transport heavy artillery, they won't be able to keep these heavy weapons supplied. And finally, even if they can keep such heavy weapons supplied, we will easily be able to locate and destroy them. Now, as I've always said, always start from reliable premises. This argument that the French military had was based on three premises. And from these three premises, they reached the conclusion that they would be able to score a great victory over their enemy. However, it turns out that number one, the enemy was able to transport heavy artillery into the valley. Number two, they were able to keep these heavy weapons supplied. It was a logistic miracle, and I have a very good book that describes exactly how they did it. But this was something that vastly exceeded the French military's expectations. And finally, number three, even if they can keep such heavy weapons supplied, we'll be easily able to locate and destroy them. The artillery was hidden so well in the mountains that the French were not able to locate where the Viet Minh were shooting at them from. And so there was nothing they could do. They were surrounded by an enemy force that was able to shoot at them. They were not able to neutralize these weapons in any significant manner. And as the days and weeks passed, they were able to basically tighten a noose of trenches around the valley floor. And this finally resulted in the great French defeat at Dien Bien Phu, which then ended the French imperial efforts in Indochina. And if you'd like to have a very long 3-hour lecture on this topic, please let me know. I'd be happy to give it to you. All right. Now, I'd like to move on to another example of premise and conclusion here. And this is the human race needs to reduce its carbon footprint in order to minimize global climate change. The climate change argument is one which takes up a lot of space on social media as well as in political discourse. So this is something which often does get argued. Now, if somebody wanted to argue that the human race as a whole needs to reduce its carbon footprint in order to reduce the effects of global climate change, they might want to give the following premises. Premise number one, modern societies are responsible for a significant amount of carbon in the atmosphere. And they could provide a number of statistics to support this. Number two, such large quantities of carbon contribute to significant changes in global climate patterns. And from this, they could move into a short explanation that would explain cause and effect. And then number three, global climate change will cause great suffering among populations if nothing is done. You could give examples of how current changes in climate have led to great hardships for certain populations in vulnerable areas. Okay. And now I'd like to move on to something a little less serious than global climate change, but something that I hope you will find just as interesting. This is, what if Batman were real? Now you're probably thinking to yourself, Batman? Really? My professor's going to talk about Batman? Yes, and I'm doing this for a very particular reason. I read a book sometime in the last year that proposed this very question. So the writer's name is Chuck Klosterman, And the title of the book is I Always Wear the Black Hat, or I Wear the Black Hat. It's an analysis of, I guess, evil in modern society, or our conception of evil in modern society. And he asks this question at the beginning of one chapter: what if Batman were real? How would you feel if Batman was not a comic book character, but an actual figure in your society? And then he starts to give a little bit of background. So follow me as I delve into this. Imagine that Gotham City is a real city and you live in Gotham City, and it's plagued with the same problems as a lot of different urban centers. So you have big problems with crime, for example. Number two, imagine that someone dressed like a bat is prowling the streets at night. And in this world, there is no DC comic book character named Batman. No one is impersonating Batman. He's never been imagined before. This is a universe or a world in which Batman doesn't exist. So they don't think, oh, he's copying this character. Oh, he's seen the movie. This is something completely original. He has some great technology. He loves to engage in street violence, and he has no connection with the police or any traditional authority. So you're living in a world where Batman does not exist as a fictional character, but someone is dressed like a bat and they're prowling the streets at night. They're engaging in violence with criminals, and they don't have any connection with the police or any other type of legitimate authority. So here's the background. There is a super rich orphan who was traumatized by his parents' murder. He witnessed their murder as a small child, and this created a great deal of trauma in his mind. And he has dedicated his life to fighting crime. And one way that he deals with that is he dresses up as a bat and then he fights crime as a vigilante. But you don't know that. You learn about him in real time, just as we all will. You don't know who he is. You don't know what he's trying to accomplish. You don't know any of this background. All you know is what you hear from mouth to mouth, talking to people at parties, or what you might hear online. There's a costumed stranger that rescued a woman being attacked by several men, and he beat the criminals until they were bloody. Um, a mother visited her son in the street, and she says it was a crazy man who broke his jaw for talking to a woman on the street. Uh, you're hearing different sides of the same story, and you don't know what to believe. Just like now, it's a very polarized time. More stories appear online and in the news. You might actually have a friend that claims that they saw, a man wearing a cape jump between two roofs of two tall buildings. You're not sure whether to believe this, but as the days and weeks go on, more and more of these stories start to come out into the public sphere and be repeated online. He's constantly trending on X. Different news broadcast stations have very different perspectives on this elusive person. And then finally, it happens. Someone manages to film Batman with their camera, maybe like jumping into a high-tech car after stopping a bank robbery or something, and then driving away. And that video has millions of views within 24 hours. He's now a kind of media celebrity, but still, you don't know who it is or what they're trying to accomplish. Batman is not on Facebook or Instagram or X or any other social media. You don't know what his side of the story is. All you know is what you're hearing from friends, family, colleagues, classmates, and what you can learn on social media. Whoever this person is, they're brilliant, they're violent, and they're focused on the criminal underground. And that's all you know. So, with that in mind, my question for each and every person in this class is, do you cheer for this person? Do you support them? Or do you think they're a danger to society and do you want them arrested? You have to choose a side. Do you think that this person dressed as a bat who is engaging in vigilante justice is a force for good and should be supported? Is it moral to support vigilante justice? This person is not identified in any way with the police force or any other legitimate source of authority. It's an individual acting alone outside the law. Or do you support this person? Do you feel that in a very violent society where the police are not able to protect its citizens, that vigilante justice can be justified? That's my question for you. Do you cheer for this person, support them, or do you think that this person should be arrested? Which side would you choose? And what is your argument to support your opinion? So I would like you to think of 3 premises, full sentence premises with a detail, a fact, or an example for each, and then a conclusion that clearly follows from your reasoning. And I would like you to put that homework on Cyber Campus assignments. This is not for points. This is just for participation, which technically means it is for points because participation is part of the course score, but you know what I mean. It's not an official writing assignment. 3 premises with a detail or fact, for example, for each. So we're looking 3 premises plus some details and examples. So that's 6 sentences, and then your conclusion. Put that on Cyber Campus assignments for your homework. The first part of your homework, I have a second part coming up a little bit later, and it's just a little add-on. But this is what I'd like to hear. Would you support Batman, or would you think that he should be arrested? All right. And finally, I think I'm not going to get the chance to actually really go very deep into this because the lecture is already going on quite long. We're moving into Unit 3 now, and this has got to do with analogies. Hopefully you've read Unit 3 by now in a textbook. If you haven't, please go and read through. It's only a few pages, and then come back and watch the rest of this lecture. An analogy is when you say something is like something else. It's comparing 2 things to make a conclusion. We'll often use a metaphor or a simile in order to make an analogy. The point of an analogy is you want to say that something is like something else, therefore, and then a conclusion can be drawn from that. And that's the important thing. Someone once asked me, well, how is an analogy different from a simile or a metaphor? A simile is a comparison that uses like or as, and a metaphor is a comparison that doesn't use like or as. An analogy will use metaphors and similes in order to make some kind of point. They might not even use a metaphor or a simile. They can use something else. But you're making some kind of comparison. A is similar to B, therefore, and there's going to be a point that they want to make. Maybe you want to say that A is okay, so that B is okay, or A is not acceptable, so therefore B is not acceptable. But it's a comparison with a point. You want to draw some kind of conclusion from it. Like it can help you explain an abstract or complex idea. It can help to show a situation from a different perspective. It can make it much easier to understand. It can help us deepen understanding of a situation where we might not quite comprehend it. It can also make it easier to understand, as well as help generate ideas. And I want to give you a couple of examples to show you how an analogy can really bring home a message. My first example here is Valentina Tereshkova, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. She is the first Russian woman to go into space, and she once said, if women can be railroad workers in Russia, why can't they fly in space? Now, she's making an analogy here. She's saying that women are just as capable as men in railroad work, and railroad work is very difficult, physically and technically. And they're also really dedicated to their country, and railroad work was very important for the country at the time. So women should also be fine as astronauts. This is very, very simple to put in an argumentative form. Women are capable railroad workers in Russia, and being a railroad worker is like being an astronaut in relevantly similar ways, and therefore women can be capable astronauts as well. Now, a quick point to be made here. Perhaps back in the day, many decades ago, there was less technical knowledge required to be an astronaut. I'm not sure. But I think her point here is not that railroad workers and astronauts have a similar level of education or technical knowledge. Her point here is that if women are able to do one kind of work, which is very difficult, then they should be able to do this other kind of work, which is also difficult. In this way, these two things, which seem to be very different, are actually similar. They are relevantly similar, and it is to make the point that women can also be capable astronauts. Here's a second analogy. This is from a Native American called, going back here. Yeah, a Native American called Fortunate Eagle. He once went to Italy on a plane, and when he came off the plane in Italy, he said, "I take possession of Italy by right of discovery, the same way that Christopher Columbus did in America." Now, we understand that going to Italy in a plane is quite different than Columbus going to the United States. Actually, it wasn't the United States, sorry, the New World, as it's called, 500 years ago. But he was trying to use this analogy in order to make a point. And I'll just read this out very quickly. "I proclaim this day the day of the discovery of Italy. What right did Christopher Columbus have to discover America when people had been living there for thousands of years? He had the same right that I now have to come to Italy and proclaim discovery of your country." So he's being a little bit sarcastic in the beginning when he says, "I'm taking possession of Italy by right of discovery." He's saying this to make a comparison between two things. Let's take a look a bit more in detail. Now, first of all, I want to point out that it's important that an analogy be relevantly similar, but they don't have to be exactly the same. Two things are never exactly the same. And when Fortunate Eagle said that he's taking possession of Italy by right of discovery, just like how Christopher Columbus did, he's not saying that taking a plane to Italy in the 21st century is the same as Christopher Columbus going to the landmass, which we now call North America, in the 14th or 15th century. But what he is saying is that they are relevantly similar in that it's not acceptable to go to another part of the country where people have another part of the world where people have been living for thousands of years and say that you are taking ownership of that piece of land by right of discovery. That is an illegitimate claim. And in that way, his analogy contains relevantly similar comparisons, even though the actual actions themselves are quite different. Remember, whether or not something is relevantly similar or relevantly different will be dependent on the point that you are trying to make. The relevance is related to the point that you want to make. A and B don't have to be identical. You need to find the ways in which they are relevantly similar. So, both Fortunate Eagle and Columbus claimed to discover a country which had been long inhabited by other people. So he's saying, look, just like how Christopher Columbus did not actually have any right to say that he owned America because he discovered it, Fortunate Eagle himself does not actually have a legitimate claim to say he was taking possession of Italy. So if we wanted to put this in premise and conclusion form, Fortunate Eagle has no right to claim Italy because it's already inhabited. Following that, Columbus's claim is similar to Fortunate Eagle's because they both claimed to take ownership of a place which had been long inhabited. Finally, Columbus had no right to claim America, just as Fortunate Eagle doesn't have a right to claim ownership of the United States or claim ownership of Italy. So in this case, he's trying to say that they are relevantly similar in that way. All right. Now, here's one of my favorite analogies of all time. This is from the Forrest Gump movie. My mama always said that life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Now, what he's trying to say here, obviously, is that when you open a box of chocolates, you don't know what is inside each of the chocolates. When you are in life, you don't know what is going to happen after you make each choice. Obviously, life is very different from a box of chocolates, but in order to make the point that we don't know the consequences of choices, these two do have a relevant similarity, which makes the analogy strong enough to make the point. Now, just about to finish the lecture. I hope you have managed to stay awake and listen until the end. I'm just about to give you the last bit of the homework. Please copy and paste this at the same time that you do the Batman question. This one is a little bit easier. I just want you to rank in terms of relevant similarities these three analogies. I want to make sure that you can understand what makes a strong analogy and what makes a weak analogy. So let's take a look at each of these three. Analogy number one. We all know that people should not drive while they're drunk. Texting while driving is like driving while drunk, in that both make people react more slowly to road hazards. Therefore, people should not text while driving. So texting while drunk is relevantly similar to drinking while driving. Therefore, you shouldn't do both. You shouldn't drink while you're driving, and you also shouldn't text while you're driving. Texting while driving is relevantly similar to driving while drunk. Analogy number two. Some people argue that there would be fewer mass shootings if more people had guns, especially in the kind of places where mass shootings occur. But arguing that having more guns will solve the problem of mass shootings is like arguing that smoking cigarettes will cure cancer. All right, so we have our second analogy here. This is comparing two different arguments. One is the argument that we should have more guns, especially in the sort of places where mass shootings are likely to occur. So maybe sporting events or churches or schools, for example. And they're saying that making that kind of argument, we should have more guns in the sort of places where mass shootings occur, is relevantly similar to arguing that smoking more cigarettes will cause cancer. That's the analogy. And finally, number three, the Earth supports living organisms. Europa, one of the moons of Jupiter, is like Earth in that both have large oceans of liquid salt water. Therefore, Europa supports living organisms. Okay, so in this case, there's a comparison between Europa, one of the moons of Jupiter, and Earth. They have a relevant similarity. They both have large oceans of liquid salt water. The conclusion is, therefore, Europa also supports living organisms. Is that similarity strong enough to support the conclusion? Because remember, the whole point of an analogy is an analogy should have relevant similarities that are strong enough to support that final point, that conclusion. So decide which do you think is the most relevant, or sorry, has the strongest relevant similarities, the second most, and which one do you think is the weakest? All right, so here's your homework. Obviously, number one, the Batman. Tell me whether you think that if you lived in a world where Batman was real, would you support him or would you think he should be arrested? Give me three premises with an example or detail for each, plus your conclusion. Also, rank from strongest to weakest those three analogies, which I've just given you here, and post those at the same time on Cyber Campus and be ready to explain your choice on Thursday. I will be very, very eager to hear why you think one analogy is stronger than another, and also why you think perhaps Batman should be arrested or whether you would support him. I will open up a page on Cyber Campus assignments, and I would like you to post your homework there. If you have any questions between the time that you watch this video and when we have class on Thursday, please put the question in the text box, or sorry, please put the question in the group chat for Kakao Work, and I will see everybody on Thursday. Once again, my apologies for not being able to come to class on Tuesday. I hope you have found this lecture interesting, and I look forward to discussing it and also going into more detail on analogies when we meet this Thursday. All right, thank you very much. Signing off.